What is the connection between love and presence? That's an interesting question. Of course, first of all, we need to look at love and what that is. Love is usually interpreted as being an emotion, and love is, in a conventional sense, love is when you feel a strong attachment to a person. For example, another human being that you fall in love with, and that is a very strong emotion, a clinging emotion. There's nothing wrong with it, but when you look at it more closely, you will find that you may already have discovered that in your own life, how quickly that emotion, that love, can actually turn into its opposite and suddenly turn into hate in relationships. How quickly the honeymoon, a year later, 2 years later, 4 years later, there's the most intense hatred between the same human beings who not long before professed eternal love and thought, this person is definitely the person who's going to make me happy. So there's an emotional thing that's called love that usually does not last that long and can easily turn into its opposite. There's also something deeper in human beings. There's something deeper than an emotion, a certain, I could say, a state of being. And that deeper thing, where you recognize something in the other that is not separate from who you are, something that deeply connects you to the other, that is something different. How can you love another human being in a way that is deeper than the transient emotion of love? And the only way that a deeper state of love can arise is by being in that state of consciousness that we call presence. When you're present with another human being, then you're not trapped in the judgments of your mind. You're not imposing labels on that person. You're able to look at a person in that space of clear presence. And when you look at a person and at the same time feel or sense the presence that you are, which ultimately is the presence of consciousness, when you look at a person and you feel your own sense, your own consciousness, and then you look at that person, and at that moment you look deeply into that person and you can sense the same consciousness that gives you life in the other person. Regardless of the personality of that person, which is the conditioning, regardless of the conditioning of their minds, you can sense something in them that is one with who you are. So you're only able to do that when you are present, because when you are not present, you're identified with your mind, and then all you have is concepts about the other person, or emotions, emotional needs, and so on that are projected onto the other person. So love ultimately is true love, beyond emotion, is the recognition of yourself in the other. So ultimately, you recognize the other essentially as yourself, not the personality, but the essence of the other as yourself. Somebody already talked about that, but 2,000 years ago, but it was misunderstood. When you are present, you love the other as yourself. It does not mean you love the other person as much as you love yourself. It means you love the other person because you recognize the essence of who you are in the other. Then you love your neighbor as yourself, to quote from what Jesus said. And so that does not require you necessarily to be in a so-called relationship with that person. You can encounter a person casually in a restaurant, in an elevator, or buying something, and there can be a moment where you connect with another human being and you sense that essential space of presence between you, and you can sense that this consciousness that is you ultimately is also the consciousness that is the essence of the other person, no matter what their personality manifests at that moment. And that's a deeply satisfying thing to actually feel your oneness with the other. So whether or not you're in a relationship with that person doesn't really matter. So you can actually means that you can have that love emanating from you whenever there is an encounter with another human being. And that is true love. Now, when you have a relationship with another person, then it is likely that the emotional love is also present. So in addition to that deeper love, which is the recognition of the other as yourself, you will also have the emotional attachment. But the emotional attachment is something that gradually you notice that the emotional attachment, as you start living with the person, you notice that the emotional attachment continues to be there, but is not as important as it was before. The deeper recognition of the other as yourself becomes the foundation for your relationship, and that is spiritual. So in any relationship, if the relationship is to last and be satisfying, then you need to actually become present in that relationship, which means get out of the judgments of your mind and the conditioning of your mind, become present in the relationship, and by becoming present with the other person, for example, being able to interact and look at the other human being without any kind of mental labeling, just in that clear space of presence, of awareness, then the true love arises. And that means the spiritual dimension becomes the foundation for that relationship, where you transcend, something arises that transcends both your personalities. The personalities still operate, There may occasionally still be disagreements and so on the purely human level, but something else is present in the relationship that transcends all that. And that can only arise through being present. So presence is actually a prerequisite for a deep relationship and a deeply satisfying relationship with another human being. And until that happens, relationships are very frustrating. And as you might have noticed, for many people, one of their main sources of suffering are their relationships. The very thing that they look to for fulfillment and happiness so often turns into their main source of suffering. And that is sad. It doesn't have to be like that. But for it not to be like that, you need to learn to be present.